What's the difference between a $1,200 boot and a $2,000 boot? Can you even tell the difference? Is there a difference? It can be confusing. I've got two great boots here, a handmade boot from Enzo Bonafè and a handmade boot from Acme Shoemaker. I'm going to try and answer that question today and give you a few of my thoughts about what that price difference really accounts for and whether I think it's important. A quick plug here, this is my handmade Antonio Macariello penny loafer, and I've been having some fit issues with it, so I've stretched this over the last 2 weeks, documented that entire process, and I'm going to share what that process was and the result with you in a video later this week. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to incorporate all of those answers, or as many of the answers as I can, in this upcoming video. Let's get back to the boots. Both of these boots are whole-cut Chelsea boots. They're both handmade, and they both have a very unique aesthetic based on that shoemaker. This will give us some differentiations, but it's also going to allow us to evaluate what the differences in the techniques, the quality of the materials, the execution, the quality of the execution, and the overall product, and whether or not an $800 difference is really justified. Now, it's going to be up to you to really make that decision. I know my answer, but I'm going to give you the details, and then it's going to be up to you to answer that question for yourself. Let's do a quick overview of each shoe, and then I'm going to get into the materials, the design, the aesthetics of each shoe, finishing off with what opportunities or criticisms do I have for each maker, and then kind of some final takeaways. I'll start with the Enzo. This is the quintessential, utilitarian shoemaker. All of the handmade details that you expect to see are here. Looking at Acme, this is a completely different aesthetic. It's a much more formal type of finishing, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just the perspective of the shoemaker and the style that they are going after. Getting into the materials, both shoemakers are using Horween leather. This is Horween Zug leather from Enzo, and hatch grain for the Acme whole-cut Chelsea boot. Both of these leathers tend to be more casual, and that's perfectly okay. Just kind of a call out in that both are using the kind of like prime cuts from Horween. If we get into some of the more granularity of the materials here, both shoes are using all leather materials. This is a real leather midsole, real leather heel stacks in the commando sole for the Enzo pair, and same for the pair from Acme. This is an oak bark tan leather outsole, a metal toe plate, and all of the thread and the stitching is very well done on both pairs. Obviously, the pair from Enzo is a 360-degree Norvegese construction versus a hand-welded construction from Acme, but the materials used for each construction are definitely, the quality materials that you would expect at a handmade shoe. Let's start with the Enzo for the overall design and pattern grading here. Looking at the pair from Enzo, this is meant to be a robust, chunky, urban commando style boot. This is one of these styles that's very contemporary today. It's very popular, and I think this one has a very good aesthetic to it. Part of that is the fact that Enzo is known for a more utilitarian look and utilitarian finishing, and that's why his style is able to execute something like this well. But you will notice some opportunities, or I noticed some opportunities I'll talk about in a little bit when we get to comparing it with the pair from Acme. Looking at Acme's overall design, last shapes, the pattern, obviously the similarities of the whole-cut Chelsea boot, but when we get into the shape of the last and how well the pattern fits that last, this is a much more elevated view. You can see that there's been a lot of time put into refining the overall, architecture, of the shapes around the arch, the instep, the heel, the ankle, really creating an anatomical shape, not just of the last, but of the leather and the bottom work as they're building around that last. That all takes time, kind of design work ahead of time, and there's just a lot of labor put into being able to deliver something like that, especially in a whole-cut Chelsea boot like this. Comparing these two last shapes, how well refined they are, you're going to see a few differences. When we look at the Enzo versus the Acme, you're going to see how that Acme has a very well-balanced look, and in it doing so, it almost has an elongated view to it, an elongated silhouette, but it's not an elongated last. Now, when we look at the Enzo, it almost has a little bit of a stubby appearance to it because of the vamp, like the line and the gradual fall off from the ankle to the toe box is more of a sharp fall off than the Acme's gradual roll down. Because of that, there's a more elegant appearance to it, and those things take time and development and refinement over the years to really get that refined of a shape. Another aspect of this shape is when we look at the chisel or like the angle of the toes. Now, obviously the Acme is more of a almond round toe versus a soft chisel from Enzo, but you're going to see on the edges, the Acme still is able to maintain a very, very faint chisel to it and a very sharp angle, but it'll have a very subtle fall off that it's not intrusive to look at. When you look at the Enzo from this low angle, you can really see there's a sharp angular nature to where the sidewall and the top meet. It's not a negative, it's just that is, that's a shape that's not as complex to make. Whereas trying to make that same overall silhouette and aesthetic without having that sharp edge to it is a much more complex shape to maintain those main lines beveling over where those lines meet. Taking a step back and looking at this as an overall execution, both of these are done very well. The Enzo obviously has a much more robust and chunky aesthetic and vision behind it, and I think that was done very well, and I think the Acme may have been done even better in delivering that very clean and refined look. I'm going to be a little nitpicky here, but with the Enzo, there are definitely some opportunities to call out how wide the welt is. Some of the stitching around the Norvegese construction isn't as tight, and there's just a little bit of inconsistency everywhere. In the Acme, you're not going to see those inconsistencies, and that is one of the major differences. One thing I can call out with Acme is they do have the opportunity to clean up some of the joint transitions from the waist to the heel, but this is very, very much getting into the minutia of shoemaking, and nobody's going to observe this unless looking at it under a microscope like we are right here. If I could boil this down to one thing, it's going to be the tolerances. What is the tolerance that each shoemaker has for being acceptable? In a $1,200 shoe, fully handmade, the tolerance for that consistency is going to be a little bit wider. The tolerance on the last for it being consistently lasted and built out every single time, it's going to be a little bit wider. Getting into a $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 shoe, those tolerances have just shrunk drastically. You're going to see much more consistent execution and delivery of the details throughout the shoe, both inside and outside, and it really depends on each client whether that price point can or should be justified. Hopefully I've been able to articulate the fact that there's a reason one boot is $1,200, one boot is $2,000. It matters to me because I value those differences and I can appreciate them to the extent that it justifies the money. Now, when you answer that question, just figure out what it is, what the characteristics, the details, or what is most important to you about the boot, and then it's going to make this decision extremely easy. If you don't care about any of this other stuff, then the $2,000 boot probably doesn't make sense. If it does, matter to you, you do value that, then do you want to afford it or can you afford it? Let me know if you have any questions, thoughts, or if there are other characteristics that I missed that you think are just as or more important than what I touched on, how you think that translates into value. Really appreciate your support. Definitely stay tuned for that video about how to stretch a pair of penny loafers or any leather shoe, and that'll be out later this week. If you want to check out more videos about unboxings, either of these two, check out this playlist, and if you want to learn more about shell cordovan, my favorite leather, check out the playlist over here. Thanks.